Our next session is a Q&A and a bit of a reflection of the two sessions that we have gone through today. A little quick introduction. Santbir Singh was actually the TA when I went to Sidak for the first time in 2014. And so that's when I got to meet him. And you know, when we think about going to Sidak, it's all about those firsts for you. And so that was my first exposure to learning and thinking and reframing and also trying new things as well, whether that was taking Hukum for the first time or doing Ardas or taking part in Deg Labs, what we call Deg Labs, which is where all participants get to experience what making Deg and distributing it as well. So we have all of that combined in our Divan sessions, which we take part in twice during the day at Sidak, and it's a chance and an opportunity for you to connect and also to learn and ask questions in kind of a classroom setting type of Gurdwara as well. And Santbir Singh was a very major part of my learning and my coming to Sidak at that time. And so we have a large team of presenters that'll be there, and you will be or facilitators. And so you'll get an opportunity to connect and perhaps share a few of your firsts with us as well. So I will turn this over to Santbir Singh, and we will talk a little reflection and Q&A.
Hello again. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Wonderful being here again, and let's get right into it. You know, Guru Nanak Sahib Ji is, of course, the central figure of Sikh history. He is the person who starts everything, and from where this revolution, as Nikor Benji so beautifully described, where this revolution started from. And this revolution of transforming the way that people not only lived their lives, but the way people behaved, the way people thought, the very processes that we go through on a daily basis. Guru Nanak Sahib Ji transformed all of those aspects of our lives. And really, the impact that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji has had is really unimaginable, of course. I mean, none of us would be here today, you know, engaging in these discussions if it hadn't been for Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, of course. There's so many questions that we can ask by Guru Nanak Sahib Ji. We've got a few great questions, and I just want to spend some time looking at those questions. But also, if any of you at any time have a question, if you could raise your hands, use the raise hand function, which you'll find at the bottom of your Zoom screen. If you're on a desktop, it might be somewhere else. If you're on a tablet, it's under reactions, and I believe it's under reactions. Yes. Yeah, it's under reactions. And then just raise your hand there and we will be able to call on you. So let's take a look at some of these questions. Let me just open that up right now. So I have a question here. Can we use the Janamsakhis to understand Guru Nanak Sahib Ji? This is a great question. So Jasprit Kaur's presentation was really about using what we call primary and secondary sources of Sikh understanding. The primary source being Guru Granth Sahib Ji, the secondary sources being the writings of Bhai Gurdas Ji and Bhai Nandlal Ji and Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji as well. And so those are the sort of secondary sources, one removed from Guru Granth Sahib Ji, and then there's tertiary sources, you know, things from Sikh history, books about Sikh history. And the earliest books about Sikh history are, of course, the Janamsakhis, which are stories about Guru Nanak Sahib Ji. And there are usually considered to be 5 Janamsakhi traditions, meaning 5 different narratives that have been passed down over history. There's the Pratan Janamsakhi, there's the Baladi Janamsakhi, there's Meherban Janamsakhi, there is, oh no, I'm forgetting them now. By Mani Singh's Janamsakhis, and there is by Gurdastri's Vara, which contains some historical information in them as well. And so these are different traditions. And what's interesting about these different traditions that they don't always agree with each other is that some sakis will appear in all 4 or 5 of those sources. Some sakis will only appear in one of those sources. Some sakis will appear in a couple of them and not in all of them. The different Janamsakhis also tend to have a different focus. You know, the Paratan Janamsakhi has a much more grounded narrative, whereas the Baibala Janamsakhi has a much more fantastical sort of storytelling apparatus, where a lot of miracles and supernatural events take place in Guru Nanak Sahib's stories. And so what's interesting that what we can do as modern Sikhs is that we can take these different Janamsakhis and we can synthesize them into one narrative. And whenever we are studying Sikh history, I always give people 2 words of advice. The first word of advice is to make sure that your faith in the Guru is really strong before you start delving into Sikh history, because Sikh history was written by different people with their own takes, with their own biases, with their own interpretations. And if one's faith in Sikhi is not strong, then it can be shaken sometimes by some of the strange things that we find in these old sakis sometimes. And so one needs to have full faith in the Guru before delving into these Sikh historical sources. And the second thing is always test the Saki against the metal, the touchstone of Gurbani, is that Guru Granth Sahib Ji should be what we use to determine, is this Saki, does it make sense? Is it Gurmat based? Does it afford us a lesson that is worth our time? Does it transform us? Does it animate something within us that allows us to move closer onto the path of the Gurus? And if the Saki does not do that, then that Saki can be ignored. And that's really a good way of thinking about it, is that we don't have to reject the Saki completely. If you don't agree with it, you can just ignore that Saki. Because, of course, we're never going to know the nature of the truth of any of these Sakis. They were all written down after the fact. And that's a really interesting point. And just, if you will forgive me this little tangent, I sometimes challenge young students when I'm teaching about Guru Granth Sahib Ji. I challenge them. I say, you know, when Guru Arjan Sahib Ji compiled Guru Granth Sahib Ji, he could have looked around, and I'm sure he did look around at other religious texts that existed at the time, not only in South Asia, but in the world. And if he were to look at the Semitic traditions, or what we call the Abramatic traditions, which is Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, you would find religious scriptures that are largely stories and rules. The majority of what we call the Jewish Bible, or the Torah, or the Tanakh, and the New Testament, the Christian Bible, is stories about different figures, or lists of rules, like in the book of Leviticus. And if we look at Hindu scripture, they are primarily mythological stories, like Mahabharata or Ramayana, for example, or they're lists of rituals, like in the Vedas, to do this ritual, you must do these actions, and so on and so forth. So, you know, poetry in and of itself, it does exist in both of these traditions, like the Bhagavad Gita in the Hindu tradition, or like the Song of Solomon, or the Psalms of David in the Jewish tradition. So there is poetry, but it's not the central part of the scriptural tradition. And yet here, Guru Arjan Sahib Ji, when he was making Guru Granth Sahib Ji, created a scripture that is all poetry, that has no real narrative stories in it, and has no real lists of rules that, you know, you get up in the morning, you're supposed to do this, in the afternoon, you're supposed to do this, in the evening, you're supposed to do this, at bedtime, you're supposed to do this. Guru Granth Sahib Ji doesn't contain that type of very prescriptive type of behavior. It doesn't really tell you what to do on a minute-by-minute basis of your day or what you should do in different situations. Instead, Gurbani is about building a relationship with Gurbani. It's about developing a relationship. It's about making that Bani a part of your very self, about integrating it into one's essence and living that Bani in our daily lives, which is really a powerful idea, a really beautiful idea. And so when we think about Sikh history, it could have been very easy for Guru Arjan Sahib Ji to ask Bhai Das Ji, can you write down a list of all the approved sakis that actually happened from Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's time up until my time? And Guru Gobind Singh Ji could have said to Bhai Mani Singh or Baba Deep Singh, can you do a list of sakis from Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji's time up to my time? And they could have included that in a separate scriptural tradition, or they could have included that at the back of Guru Granth Sahib Ji. It would have been very easy to do that. And the question is, why did the Gurus not do that? I mean, they knew that questions of historicity, of authenticity would be constantly plaguing the community for centuries to come. And yet they still chose not to engage in creating a scripture in that way. And that's something to ask ourselves. Why did the Gurus create scripture in the way that they did? Why did they not include narrative stories? And so Janamsakhis are important. They're interesting. Other sakis from Sikh history, and this is coming from someone who loves studying Sikh history, are interesting and important, but they are not all the be-all and end-all of Sikhi. What really matters in Sikhi is developing that relationship with Guru Granth Sahib Ji, with developing that relationship with Bani, using Bhai Gurdas Ji's Vada, Bhai Nandlal Ji and Guru Gobind Singh Ji's Bani to develop a deeper relationship with Guru Granth Sahib Ji. That's what's really important. So let's move on to the next question. What would Guru Nanak Sahib Ji say about our modern way of living in capitalism? It's a really interesting question. Professor Puran Singh writes an interesting critique of socialist states in his books. Sidak Kapoor Singh also writes a critique of socialist and communist states in his book, where he says the essence of life has been reduced to food, to material possessions, to material needs. And it robs the human of the beautiful essence of what it means to be human, where everything is reduced to just a material equation. And I would say that the same criticism can be made not only of communist states, but can be also made of capitalist states, is that in a capitalist system, everything becomes commodified. Everything is about value. Everything has a price to it. We will see that it doesn't matter what activist trend it is, it will eventually be co-opted by capitalism, whether it's Black Lives Matter, whether it's gay pride, whether it is the protests against the war in Ukraine, whatever it is, corporations will figure out a way to make money off of it. And so in a capitalist system, everything becomes about value and very little is left to be of essence. And I'm not saying that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji would be anti-capitalist. I think that's a much deeper question and a more interesting question to ask about what would be the economic system that the Gurus developed and what type of economic system did they believe in. That's a different question. What would Guru Nanak Sahib Ji think about our lives in these highly capitalist states that we live in today? I think that Guru Sahib Ji would think that our lives are fairly empty in a lot of ways, that our lives are really centered around the accumulation of wealth and the display of wealth, and that is a pretty empty and sad way of living one's life. And I think the Gurus would challenge us to find more meaning, to find a more meaningful, a more truthful connection to what it means to be human. And I think that would be my short answer to how Guru Nanak Sahib Ji would consider or think about our lives within capitalist, modern living of capitalism. Here's a question: what's the biggest misconception of Guru Nanak? So I think both Jasprit Kaur and Inni Penji really touched on this, and that is, of course, that Shabbat Singh image of Guru Nanak Sahib Ji. Excuse me a second. It's that image of Guru Nanak as this, rosy-cheeked, white-bearded, very soft-looking individual. And we know that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji was not a soft individual. He walked literally like 30 years of his life across Asia, everywhere from Tibet to as far west as Saudi Arabia, or what today is Saudi Arabia, and maybe even further. And so Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's physically would have been just a much tougher individual than what we imagine. And this is someone who, when he came back and developed the town of Kartarpur, he, until the time of his death, for the next 20 years, as an old man in Kartarpur, went out every day and farmed and worked hard with his hands and didn't live off the money of his Sikhs, but produced his own food and produced his own resources. Him and his wife and his children were working. So Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, I would say, a big misconception is how we physically imagine the Guru is one thing, but it's also that dichotomy that we've created between the more quote unquote spiritual and the more quote unquote more political gurus, which is such a prevalent and pervasive image of the gurus that even now, when Sikh history classes are taught, when people are taught about Sikhi and world religion courses in university, they are still taught through that dichotomy that Guru Nanak to Guru Arjan are one way, Guru Har Gobind to Guru Gobind Singh are another way, and so on and so forth. So that would, I would say, would be the biggest misconception about Guru Nanak Sahib Ji. The fact that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji was a warrior and had the spirit of a warrior. And I challenge you to think about Guru Nanak Sahib Ji at age 9 doing his Janot ceremony. So Guru Nanak Sahib Ji is sitting there, and all of the village has been called. Not only all of the village, but all of Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's relatives have been called. This is a big event. It's like the equivalent of a marriage. It's a big party. It's a celebration. All the family has arrived. Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's Nanake have arrived. His grandparents are there. Everybody from the village is there. The head of the village is there. Rai Balad is there, and surrounded by all of these people with all the focus on him and the ceremony that he's going to undergo. In that moment, Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, as a child, as a 9-year-old child, had the courage, had the commitment to truth, had the commitment to principles to be able to say, no, I will not go through with this ceremony. I am putting a stop to this. And I am saying that this is, frankly, a silly ceremony that doesn't make sense. And it doesn't make sense because what does it represent? What does the string really achieve? Does it really make me a better person? I do not want to engage in rituals that don't better myself, that don't develop myself, that make me a better human being. Is this a ceremony that all people can partake in? Is this a ceremony that so-called low-caste people can partake in? Is this a ceremony that women can partake in? And so Guru Nanak Sahib Ji critiques the ceremony right to Pandit Hardayal's face, right there in front of everybody. And I really think, wow, that's the spirit of a warrior. I don't know many of us who would have the courage, with all of that attention on us, with all of our family there, to be able to speak up and say, I don't want to go through with this, and I think it's wrong. And here's the reason why it's wrong. It is incredible that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji was able to do that. Really incredible. And Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, like Inni Penji had brought up with his interactions with Babur, and earlier in the Sikh tradition, Sikh historiography, we know that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji also met Ibrahim Lodi, the emperor of India before Babur. Guru Nanak Sahib Ji had visited Delhi and met Ibrahim Lodi. And Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's interactions with both Ibrahim Lodi and Babur the Mughal, the two rulers of India during his lifetime, really demonstrate that warrior spirit, that warrior aspect of the Guru. What separates Guru Nanak Sahib Ji from Guru Gobind Singh Ji is not that one is a warrior and one isn't. What separates them is one has an army and one doesn't. And that's really the big difference, is that Guru Gobind Singh Ji has an army and Guru Nanak Sahib Ji has Bhai Mardana. And we can think of those 238 years from Guru Nanak Sahib Ji to the revelation of the Khalsa in 1699 as a progression of building up someone like Bhai Mardana to the place where they can be like Bhai Daya Singh, Bhai Dharam Singh, Bhai Mohkam Singh, like Mata Pak, or like Baba Banda Singh Bahadur, where they can develop a human being into being that saint soldier ideal. And so the difference is not in the Guru, the difference is in the Sikh, is the big difference between the two Gurus. The difference is in us. And the fact that we needed those 2.5 centuries of development to get to a place where we could stand with our Guru and push back against these systems of oppression, against these systems of inequality, against the and push for an egalitarian system in the world. Okay. And remember, if anybody has a question, don't hesitate to raise your hand. Let's turn back to the questions that we have here that were given in. Why did Guru Nanak Sahib Ji go on the Udasis? What a great question. That's a really great question. Why did Guru Nanak Sahib Ji spend, a majority of his life walking? Walking all the way to Sri Lanka, walking all the way to Tibet, walking all the way to Arabia, walking to the jungles of eastern India, to what we call Assam and the border areas of Burma. Why would Guru Nanak Sahib Ji spend so much of his life walking to these different places? In Siddh Guru Nanak Sahib Ji gives us the answer. Gurmukh Khoj Kare Udasi, that it was to find the Gurmukhs. It was to find like-minded people who had a relationship with Vaheguru that I went on these Udasis. So that's the most simple answer that we can have. It's from Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's own mouth in Siddh Ghosh when the yogis asked him, why did you go on this trip? Why are you here? He says, I came on this trip to find Gurmukhs. So that's the most basic answer. There's other deeper levels of answers that we can get to as well. And it's really interesting to see how Bhai Gurdas Ji understands the Udasis. And if you read the first Vad of Bhai Gurdas Ji's 40 Vads, it starts off talking about the world and about Islam and about Hinduism and about the different traditions and different schools of thought. And then it talks about the coming of Guru Nanak, and then it explains the basics of Sikhi. And then Bhai Gurdas Ji explains some few sakis of Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's life. Because remember, his focus, like Guru Nanak Sahib Ji, is not on historical events, but is on the philosophy of Sikhi. And Bhai Gurdas Ji shows Guru Nanak Sahib Ji one by one interacting with either Vedic authority or Vedic/yogic authorities or Islamic authorities, and challenging them and besting them in these debates, in this charcha, in this discussion that they're having, where Guru Nanak Sahib Ji will challenge the Muslim scholars of Multan, or will challenge the scholars of Baghdad, or will challenge the scholars at Mecca. Or Guru Nanak Sahib Ji will challenge the Hindu scholars at Kashi, will challenge the Hindu scholars at Hardwar, or Benares, and Guru Nanak Sahib Ji will challenge the yogic scholars in the mountains of the Himalayas. And so the Udasis are not just Guru Nanak Sahib Ji looking and trying to find Gurmukhs. It's also about demonstrating in a very real and practical and straightforward way what is revolutionary and unique about the Sikh tradition. So we can see, Guru Nanak Sahib Ji went and spoke to the yogis, and he said, I disagree with the fact that you leave society. I disagree with the fact that you don't have jobs, that you don't contribute to the world. I disagree with the fact that you have abandoned your families. And Guru Nanak Sahib challenges them on their basic principles and demonstrates that the way they're living their lives is a little bit futile. And Guru Nanak Sahib goes to Mecca and he challenges the idea of one place being more sacred than the other. And he challenges the idea that one must go on a pilgrimage in their life, otherwise their life is useless. And he challenges the idea that there are categories of human beings as believers and non-believers, and that non-believers should be treated differently than believers. He challenges those primary ideas in Islam, just like he challenged those primary ideas in the yogic tradition or in Vedantic tradition. So the Udasis are also Guru Nanak Sahib engaging in debate with these other world religious traditions and demonstrating that Sikhi is the Tisar Panth, the third path, the third way, unique from both the South Asian traditions of Hinduism, yoga, and Buddhism, and also different from the Semitic, Abramatic traditions of Islam, Judaism, and Christianity, that it's a third way. If we look at most of the world religions in the world, they fall into one of those two schools of thought. They're either from the South Asian traditions or they're from the Semitic traditions. And Sikhi is unique in that it's a world religion that doesn't fall or doesn't arise out of those two traditions. And so that's another reason, in my understanding, of why Guru Nanak Sahib went on the Udasis. It was to demonstrate the unique beauty, the Nyarapan, the Sikhi is such a different path that a lot of us even bristle at using the term religion when talking about Sikhi nowadays, because religion brings up certain ideas in one's mind, and Sikhi isn't that. Sikhi is not just a religion. Sikhi is something much more and something much more expansive. And so Sikhi is such a unique path that Guru Nanak Sahib needed to demonstrate that uniqueness by engaging in discussion with these other traditions and showing, hey, this is what you believe, here's what I believe, and this is what my people are going to follow. And that's our inspiration. That's our goal moving forward, is to follow that path. Okay, let's continue on to the next question. Why did Guru Nanak Sahib pass on the Guruship? So why was one Guru not enough, is I guess the question here. Why did Guru Nanak Sahib need to need to continue the Guruship past himself? Why could it not just end with himself and that be the be-all and end-all? And I think this goes back to what I was saying earlier, is that Sikhi is, or let's use a quote that Jasprit Kaur used when talking about, from Paisatan Pai Bhawanswar. Nanak Raj Jalaya Sach Kot Satani Neev De. Guru Nanak Sahib started the Raj and he built a throne, a takat, a court, Satani Neev De, and he laid the foundation stone of truth in it, and it was built on that foundation of truth. So we can understand Sikhi, if you want to visualize it for a second, as a pyramid, with Guru Nanak Sahib Ji as the base of that pyramid. And every single aspect of Sikhi, be it our social ideology, be it our political thought, be it our military tradition, be it our poetic tradition, be it our musical tradition, all of those arise from Guru Nanak Sahib Ji. All of them can be traced to Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's life. And then each Guru Sahib built upon that foundation, strengthening that foundation and building upon it. So Bhai Lehna, who became Guru Angad Sahib Ji, built upon that. He developed the Gurmukhi alphabet. He developed the martial tradition further. He wrote Bani in Guru Nanak Sahib Ji's name, showing that the Gurus are one spirit, one in and of themselves. And then Guru Amar Das Ji built on what Guru Nanak Sahib and Guru Angad Sahib Ji had done. And then Guru Ram Das Ji built upon that, and Guru Arjan Sahib Ji built upon that. Until you finally get to Guru Gobind Singh Ji, who puts a capstone on the pyramid of the Khalsa. And so we really are the answer. How about that? How about that's a nice way of putting it. If Guru Nanak Sahib Ji asks a question, what is the way that a human being should live? The answer Guru Gobind Singh Ji gives is my Khalsa. That is the way a human being should live. And the way that we live and the lessons that we learn arise from those earlier gurus, and we must have those lessons. You know, we get the warrior tradition, we get the sword, for example, from Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji. But having the sword is fine. But what happens to a lot of traditions that have a sword, meaning they have the ability to resort to arms, to violence in order to get what they want? They can very quickly become tyrannical. They can very quickly start to exert their ideology upon others. And so within the Guru's lives, there's checks and balances. So Guru Tegh Bahadur Ji acts as a check, as a balance, on Guru Har Gobind Sahib Ji's Kirpan, so that a Sikh knows, yes, we have his Kirpan and we can defend and we can fight, but we must never do it to take away the rights of other people. We can never do it to harm another being. We can never do it to exert our ideology and push our thought process on others. That is not the point of having a talwar, of having shastra. So we can see in each of the gurus that each of them adds something to that foundation that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji has developed, and they build upon it. And you know, we can go through each Guru Sahib and talk about the major ideas, the major paradigms, the major philosophical ideas that they brought in. But that would, of course, be a whole nother day of talks, right? But safe to say that each of the gurus brought a lot to that equation, and that the end result of that equation was the development of the Khalsa by Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji. Anu, how much time do I have left? I just want to make sure I don't go over.
We've got about 10 more minutes.
10 more minutes. Okay, perfect. That's good. I have a question here. What does Shabbat Wisdom mean? What does Shabbat Wisdom mean? So Shabbat is a very interesting word. Sabad, as it appears in Guru Granth Sahib Ji, the word appears as Sabad. And in Punjabi, contemporary Punjabi, we use the word Shabbat. How can we understand Shabbat? What is Shabbat? I think a very if I had to explain it to a child, I would say that Shabad is that aspect of Vaheguru that a human heart can fall in love with. Shabad is like a thread that allows us to connect to the Vaheguru that exists within us. It is a conduit that allows us to develop a relationship with Akal Purkh Vaheguru. So Shabad is a transmission source, a medium of information exchange that Vaheguru gives us information, and we are able to demonstrate our love back towards Vaheguru. And that's what Shabad is, and that's what Shabad allows us to do. Shabad wisdom, Shabad is wisdom. It's a wisdom of how to live one's life. And Guru Granth Sahib Ji is the embodiment of the Shabad Guru. And the earlier Gurus were also the embodiment of the Shabad Guru, but the Guru Granth Sahib Ji is the most perfect embodiment of that never dying, unchanging, ever living Guru. And for Guru Granth Sahib Ji, what we're so blessed with is that Guru Granth Sahib Ji tells us this within its own ang, within its own pages. Pothi Parmeswar ka than, sar sang ave gun gobind, puran brahm gyan. that this poti is the place of Parmeshwar, is a place of the ever-present, transcendent divine one. That Vaheguru exists within Guru Granth Sahib Ji, not in the paper or the ink or the binding or the cover, but in the spirit of the Bani itself is the essence of Vaheguru. And if we want to develop a relationship with that Vaheguru, we need to develop a relationship with that Bani. And that's the best way to develop that relationship. Okay, let's go on to the next question. How can we embody Raj Jog philosophy teaching into our lives? This is a great question. And it's about how do we bring Miri Piri into our lives is really what the question is. You know, when the British first met Sikhs, they were astounded by Sikhs. They were like, these people sometimes have no possessions. They're like on a horse with like barely any possessions. And yet they carry themselves with a royalty, with a dignity, with a nobility that is really striking. And, you know, Cunningham writes in his History of the Sikhs, he says, I asked a Sikh horseman, you know, who is your boss? Who do you follow? And he says, how dare you? I am a Sikh. I follow no one but Akal Purkh Vaheguru. I follow no one but my Guru. I don't follow any earthly person. I am sovereign. I am Bagi Jan Badshah. I am either a rebel fighting for freedom or I am free. And those are the two states of being I can be in. And so how do we bring that spirit into our 21st century lives, living in the diaspora, living in countries like Canada or Australia, Britain, America? How do we bring that into living in India, Punjab today? How do we bring that into our lives? How do we exhibit, how do we embody sovereignty in all aspects, not only in temporal ways, but in spiritual ways? And I think what we have to understand is, what is sovereignty really about? Sovereignty is about freedom. And what is freedom about? Freedom is about being free of chains, of bonds. Freedom is of being able to do what your heart desires. And that's what it means to be sovereign. But we can't know what our heart desires when we are under the control of Kam, Krodh, Loh, Moh, Hankar, because our minds are enslaved in that instance. And so we must free our minds to understand what it is that our mind truly wants and truly desires, not what we think our mind wants and desires. And we must free our bodies so that our bodies can have what our bodies really desire, which is freedom of thought and action and behavior, and being able to live our lives and make our families and have our jobs and live with the glow of freedom without being constrained by state apparatuses. So embodying Raj Yoga on a day-to-day basis is about carrying yourself with the dignity of that Sikh horseman that Cunningham met, centuries ago. It's about walking around knowing, I don't bow to anyone. I bow only to my Guru. I bow only to Guru Granth Sahib Ji, and I'm a member of the Guru Khalsa Panth, and that's who I am. And it's carrying that spirit alive while still being Andro Pola, Andro Nirmal, Andro Niva, Baro Ucha. So being low and humble while still carrying yourself with dignity and respect, which is a difficult thing to do. Can you carry yourself with a noble bearing while still being humble? While not exerting yourself on others, while not bullying others, while not pushing your ideas on others, while being dignified, being kind, being loving, being open, being gracious. So that's really the challenge of a Sikh. How do we embody this Badshahi that we've been given by Guru Gobind Singh Sahib Ji, that we've been given by Guru Nanak Sahib Ji? How do we embody Badshahi while being full of nimrata, being full of humility? And that's really the sort of central crux of what Sikhi is asking of us. So we have about 5 minutes left. So I think we've got another question. Let's look at that last question and we'll talk about that. How can we build a connection with that one force, with that Ikon God? Everywhere you look, in one way or another, human beings are desperate to build a connection. You know, people go to church or formal religious institutions, much less in the global north, in the first world, the developed world, whatever you want to call it, much less than they used to. You know, people don't go to church on Sundays anymore. It's much rarer now. Churches are becoming condominiums all over the place. But that doesn't mean people are done asking spiritual questions. People are still desperate for answers. And you can see this in self-help books. You can see this in television programs. You can see this online, on Instagram, on social media, that people are still desperate for answers. They're still desperate for meaning in life. They're still desperate for connection in life. Everyone is still so thirsty for something that makes their life mean something. That it can't just be, we get up and go to work every day, come home, feed our kids, exhausted, go to bed, wake up the next day, repeat again and again. That our lives can't just be that empty, right? There must be something more to this. So that's what we are all asking ourselves. And we are blessed if we are born in this tradition, or if we find the Sikh tradition, if we find it later in our lives. We are blessed to find the Guru who gives us that answer, that gives meaning to our lives, that gives a purpose to our existence. And that purpose is very straightforward. How do we develop a relationship with that one force? Through Deg and Deg. Deg, Deg, Fateh. That's as simple as that. It's by serving others and fighting for others. It's by serving the Vaheguru within us and serving the Vaheguru outside of us in one way or another. That is how we build that connection, through seva, through developing relationships with other beings, through developing a relationship within ourselves. It's about experiencing Vaheguru within and without in every waking moment. How do you do that? It's by serving Vaheguru. And Barney tells us this. It's by developing a humble mindset of service, of servant leadership, that we can develop a relationship with the Guru. So the way that we can build that relationship with Akal Purkh, with Ikon God, with one force, is by using that khanda to cut away at the bonds within ourselves, Kam, Krodh, Lobh, Moh, Ahankar, and cut away at the bonds in the world. That's why it's double-edged, so that it can cut both ways. It can cut both inside and outside at the same time. And that's really what Sikhi is challenging us to do. Can you do that? Guru Gobind Singh Ji, Guru Nanak Sahib Ji is asking, can you challenge yourself to pick up that khanda and first of all face yourself in the mirror and then face the world? Can you be that revolutionary that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji wants us to be? And be revolutionary in all of your behavior and actions, in all of your daily interactions, in all the little mundane ways that we live our lives. Because it's in the small moments that life is composed of. It's not, a lot of us don't get opportunities to have those big moments where we are the center of the stage and the whole world is looking at us. That's rare for that to happen. Instead, life is made up of a lot of small moments, a lot of tiny interactions with strangers, with family, with loved ones, with co-workers, with fellow students, with fellow workers. That's what life is made up of, all those small interactions. How do you bring Sikhi into those daily interactions? How do you develop a relationship based on Guru with all of your relationships in your life? Be it with your dog, be it with your grandmother, be it with your best friend? How can you bring Sikhi into that relationship? That's a real challenge that Guru Nanak Sahib Ji is putting forth to us. And the answer to that challenge, and to hit the nail on the head one last time, is to look to Guru Granth Sahib Ji. It's to look to Gurbani. It's to build a relationship with Guru Granth Sahib Ji, to build a relationship with Bani, to immerse yourself in that Bani, to weave that Bani into yourself, so that where you begin and Bani ends becomes an arbitrary question, that there is no division between you and Bani, that you are one and the same, that it has become truly a part of you on a cellular level. That's what we are aiming towards. So thank you for your time. Thank you to Inni Benji for her beautiful talk. Thank you to Jaspreet Kaur for her enlightening talk. Thank you for your time, those of you who are taking part in this workshop. Thank you for your time and your patience. I apologize if I've made any mistakes or any mistakes in my Bani pronunciation while giving this talk. I ask the Sangat for forgiveness, and I thank you for your time. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.
Thank you so much for going through those, questions. I think that those are some very important questions as we think about Guru Nanak Sahib, but also those are kind of parts of those questions I was finding was like that unlearning and the learning piece that we really explore at Sidak. And so I hope you enjoyed our presentation today and you've got to learn a little more about Guru Nanak Sahib, as well as reflect on your own connection with Vaheguru as well. As we look towards our summer, we are accepting applications for Sidak 2023. Sidak will take place July 23rd through to August 5th in beautiful British Columbia. I'm a little biased as it is my backyard. So we will be accepting applications now until July, but just keep in mind that our spaces are limited and that we are hoping to see your application soon as possible. If you would like to learn a little bit more about Sidak and get some information around our 3 tracks. So we have Sikhi 101 and Sikhi 201 and also Gurbani 101. If you could head over to that website at sikri.org/Sidak, you will find 3 informational clips and some videos that describe each of the tracks in a little more detail, which will help in your decision making as to which track you'd like to apply. Sidak is a leadership program that is designed for ages 18 to 39. And it will be fee-free thanks to the generous donations of so many of our funders out there. It is quite a feat that the community has really come behind Sidak, as we see for the last 20 years that this has really made an impact in the leaders in our community. As a person who attends Sidak, you will be with an incredible group of facilitators, along with an amazing group of individuals that have come from all over the world. So your circle, your community work, your connections with your careers, and you will get to make more and more connections, and the effect of Sidak is just amplified as we take this back to our little corners of the world. So please send in your applications. The link there to sikri.org/Sidak has a link in the bottom of that website as well for the application form and the questions that we'd like to ask you as you come to Sidak, and it gives us a chance to get to know you a little bit better. And with that, I want to thank all of you so much for joining us. I'd like to thank our presenters today, Inni Kaur, Jaspreet Kaur, and Santbir Singh, along with Raman Kaur in their back, helping us out with all of our technical issues. But the biggest thank you of all comes to all of our participants today. We hope that this has been an enlightening experience for you. And we look forward to seeing you at Sidak this year. Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.